Imagine a world where humanity's worst instincts have been amplified to the extreme, where greed knows no bounds, envy spreads like a virus, and wrath turns into public spectacle. Sounds like a nightmare? Maybe. But take a look around. You'll realize this reality is already here. The 7 deadly sins, once seen as mere moral warnings, now shape human behavior in terrifying ways. What was once considered a flaw has become the very fuel of a system that thrives on chaos. And the worst part? Most people don't even realize they're trapped in it. Have you ever felt like the world is becoming more violent, more selfish, and more superficial? That people seem to be consuming endlessly, competing without purpose, and chasing pleasure without ever finding fulfillment? This isn't a coincidence. The 7 deadly sins are not just personal flaws. They are the gears of something much bigger, an invisible web that keeps society addicted, distracted, and controlled. But what is the cost of all this? Is there still time to escape? Or have we already crossed the point of no return? Get ready, because this story is not just about what's happening to the world. It's about what's happening to you. The invasion of greed in the modern world. Greed has never been as glorified as it is today. It hides behind the facade of success, of winning in life, and infiltrates every level of society. Companies push employees to their limits. Politicians make empty promises while lining their own pockets. And ordinary people are seduced by the illusion that happiness is measured by bank balances. Look at the financial scandals that have devastated entire nations, from Wall Street to the Enron case, leaving a trail of destruction for those who had nothing to do with the insatiable thirst for power and profit. But the worst part? Greed doesn't just destroy nations. It corrodes the soul of those who nurture it. Think about human relationships. How many friendships fall apart because of money? How many families are torn apart by inheritance disputes? Greed turns people into disposable assets, where what matters is not who you are, but what you can offer. And when everything is reduced to transactions, love becomes a bargaining chip, trust becomes a risk, and empathy disappears. Large corporations exploit workers to the maximum, paying miserable wages while executives accumulate unimaginable fortunes. Inequality grows like a ravenous beast, fed by the false promise that working harder is the solution, when in reality, the game is already rigged for only a few to win. The psychological cost of greed is immense. The endless pursuit of more creates chronic dissatisfaction, a void that can never be filled. Loneliness, anxiety, distrust. These are the true interest rates charged for a life dedicated to accumulation. And ironically, those who acquire the most are often the ones who fear losing the most. Think of paranoid millionaires, surrounded by security guards, suspicious of everyone. In the end, greed doesn't enrich, it enslaves. But there's something even darker than this, something that greed awakens, something that doesn't just devour wealth but also the very essence of humanity. Lust and the objectification of others. The digital age has turned lust into an invisible, silent, yet devastating addiction. Never has it been so easy to access instant pleasure. Everything is just a click away. Pornography, once hidden behind red curtains, now floods phone screens at any hour of the day. Dating apps have turned human connections into a game of disposables. Swipe right, try, discard. Relationships have become fleeting, based on aesthetics and momentary excitement, while true emotional bonds dissolve like smoke. But what happens when instant pleasure replaces depth? When desire becomes a product, and people mere objects of consumption? The objectification of others not only reduces human beings to mere biological functions, but also creates a culture where empathy disappears. Bodies become commodities, measured in likes, followers, and social status. Love? It becomes secondary. We see this in public scandals, in abuse cases exposed by movements like #MeToo, in marriages destroyed by virtual betrayals. The digital age has elevated pleasure to the level of necessity, but deep down, it hides a terrible truth. The more we seek superficial pleasure, the emptier we become. Relationships deteriorate, connection becomes an illusion, and desire turns into a vicious cycle that is never satisfied. And the cost? Enormous. Families torn apart by infidelities, careers ruined by sexual scandals, individuals drowning in depression because they cannot meet the unrealistic standards created by this industry of desire. Lust does not bring satisfaction, it imprisons. Like a sweet poison, it offers immediate pleasure while destroying everything around it. And when everything is reduced to desire, when skin becomes more important than the soul, something even darker begins to manifest. something that cannot be contained and fuels the chaos around us. Wrath and uncontrollable violence. Wrath spreads like wildfire in the digital age. Social media, which was meant to connect people, has become a battlefield where outrage is fuel and hatred is entertainment. Cancel culture has turned into a public spectacle, where one mistake can condemn someone to eternal exile. A single wrong word, a misunderstood comment, and suddenly, furious crowds unite to destroy reputations without mercy. But is this collective rage always justified? Or are we feeding a monster that we can no longer control? Wrath, once unleashed, does not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. It simply consumes everything in its path. On the streets, the scenario is even worse. Urban violence, fueled by growing inequalities and accumulated frustrations, turns small arguments into tragedies. A minor traffic dispute, a wrong glance, and suddenly, lives are taken in fits of uncontrollable fury. The world has become a powder keg, where any spark can cause an explosion. It's not uncommon to see petty quarrels ending in murder, neighbors becoming mortal enemies, and strangers killing each other over meaningless disputes. Wrath doesn't just destroy its target, it transforms those who carry it, corroding their sanity until nothing is left but the desire to see others suffer. But the worst part of wrath is its vicious cycle. Those who feed on it are never satisfied. Anger creates more anger, hatred breeds more hatred, and violence is never content with just one victim. And when everyone is armed, ready to attack at the slightest provocation, society becomes a battlefield where no one is truly safe. But there is an even more insidious sin than wrath, one that disguises itself as innocent pleasure but slowly devours those who surrender to it. Gluttony and unrestrained consumption. Gluttony is no longer just about food, it has spread to every aspect of life. We live in a world where nothing is ever enough, where the desire for more has become an artificial necessity. It's not enough to eat, we must overindulge. It's not enough to buy, we must flaunt. Society encourages reckless consumption, making us believe that happiness can be bought, that the emptiness inside can be filled with material goods and instant pleasure. But what's the cost? People drowning in debt, addicted to shopping, trapped in a culture that teaches them to crave without ever finding fulfillment. The appetite for more is never satisfied. It's a bottomless pit that devours everything in its path. The impact of gluttony is not just economic, but also physical and mental. Excess destroys bodies and minds, creating epidemics of obesity, eating disorders, and uncontrollable addictions. The fast food industry thrives while millions suffer from diseases caused by excessive sugar, fat, and processed foods. But gluttony isn't just on our plates. It lurks in the insatiable desire for entertainment, in the compulsive consumption of series, videos, and social media. We've never been so full of stimuli and yet so empty. Gluttony numbs us, keeps us occupied, distracts us from what truly matters, until we realize that we've been reduced to mere consumers, with no control over our own desires. And like all excess, gluttony comes at a price. The planet suffers from waste, overproduction, and irresponsible disposal. Consumerism generates waste, depletes natural resources, and degrades the environment at an unsustainable rate. But the hunger for more never stops, never lessens. And in the end, gluttony turns into self-destruction. But there is an even more poisonous sin, one that doesn't just consume, it infects the soul of those who feel it. Envy and the corrosion of relationships. Envy has always existed, but today it has become a monster fueled by social media. Never before has it been so easy to compare your life to that of strangers who seem to have everything: money, beauty, success, unshakable happiness. We scroll through our feeds and see mansions, perfect bodies, luxurious vacations, and without realizing it, we start feeling smaller, inadequate. Envy corrodes silently, turning admiration into bitterness, desire into resentment. We follow influencers, celebrities, even people we know, not realizing that we are slowly poisoning ourselves. But is what we see even real? Or are we chasing ghosts, illusions designed to keep envy alive? The problem with envy is that it's never satisfied. It destroys friendships, damages relationships, and turns partners into rivals. At work, it creates toxic environments where someone else's success feels like a personal threat. In personal life, it seeps into marriages, friendships, and family ties, turning love into competition. How many siblings have fought over inheritances? How many friends have drifted apart because they couldn't stand to see the other succeed? Instead of inspiring, Someone else's success becomes a cruel reminder of what we don't have. And so, envy feeds on frustration, on the desire to see others fall, to destroy what we cannot possess. But envy doesn't just harm others, it destroys the one who feels it. It prevents gratitude, robs peace, and turns life into an endless race for something that will never be enough. Those consumed by envy are always looking sideways, comparing, competing, desiring. And in the end, none of it brings happiness. But there is an even more treacherous sin, one that doesn't just corrode, it paralyzes, turning people into prisoners of their own minds. Sloth and the stagnation of the soul. Modern sloth no longer looks like someone sleeping all day. It disguises itself as procrastination, constant distraction, and the endless postponement of dreams. We are glued to our screens, jumping from video to video, from post to post, consuming content that entertains but does not make us grow. I'll start tomorrow, just one more episode, I'll deal with it later. And so, days turn into weeks, weeks into years, and life remains on pause. But the truth is brutal. Sloth steals time, and time is the one resource that can never be recovered. By the time we realize it, it's too late, and all that's left are regrets about what could have been. But sloth doesn't just affect productivity, it destroys the soul. People stop growing, stop seeking knowledge, stop evolving. Digital dependence and the culture of absolute comfort turn many into prisoners of their own inertia, avoiding any effort that requires stepping outside their comfort zone. It's no wonder that so many people feel empty, sensing that something is wrong but lacking the strength to change. Sloth doesn't just delay dreams, it suffocates the desire to have them. When there is no purpose, when life is reduced to filling time with distractions, existence becomes a meaningless loop. The body may be alive, but the soul? Stagnant, asleep, incapable of moving forward. And the price of sloth is not paid only on an individual level. A society full of lazy people is a society that does not evolve, that accepts anything, that settles for less. Corrupt politicians love the people's sloth because it prevents rebellion. Exploitative companies take advantage of mental laziness because it prevents questioning. Sloth is not harmless, it's an invisible trap, a poison that paralyzes its victims without them even realizing it. And when the ego inflates to the point of believing there is nothing left to learn, an even more dangerous sin emerges, one that always comes before the fall. Pride and the fall of the ego. Pride is the most treacherous of sins because it gives the illusion of absolute power. Those consumed by it believe they are untouchable, above the rules, incapable of failure. It is the sin that always comes before the fall. Leaders who defy morality, celebrities who see themselves as immortal, influencers who treat their followers like subjects, they all share the same blindness, the belief that they are beyond good and evil. But history proves otherwise. How many powerful figures have been destroyed by their own arrogance? How many empires have crumbled because their rulers believed themselves invincible? Pride doesn't build eternal kingdoms, it digs graves. And the worst part? Pride prevents self-awareness. Those consumed by it ignore advice, dismiss warnings, and march forward as if nothing could stop them. But the world always finds a way to bring down those who fly too high without looking down. Politicians lose everything over scandals they could have avoided. Business leaders destroy fortunes by making decisions based on ego rather than logic. Celebrities fall from grace because they believed fame made them untouchable. Pride is the most dangerous illusion because it convinces its victims that there is no danger at all. And it is precisely at that moment that ruin strikes. But pride does not exist in isolation. It feeds on other sins: greed, envy, wrath. It is the final stage before destruction, the point of no return, where everything collapses. And when all sins intertwine, when they form an uncontrollable cycle, the final abyss opens. But is there still salvation? Or have we already crossed the threshold of no return? The interconnection of sins and the final abyss. The 7 deadly sins do not act alone. They feed on each other, forming a vicious cycle that traps those who fall into their web. Greed fuels envy, envy ignites wrath, wrath leads to destruction, and pride prevents any chance of redemption. Lust numbs the pain, while gluttony and sloth keep people distracted, unable to see that they are sinking. The modern world is a reflection of this web of vices, where millions live without realizing they are slowly being consumed. But what happens when this spiral reaches its peak? When there is no turning back? The answer is all around us. Inequality has never been so extreme, violence has never been so present, and society has never been so divided. Empty people try to fill their void with excess, while the relentless pursuit of more leads to despair. The internet has turned sins into a lifestyle, showing off, superficiality, blind hatred, all rewarded with likes and temporary validation. Meanwhile, those in power profit from this decay, encouraging a world where distraction reigns and deep thinking disappears. And when no one thinks, no one realizes how deep the abyss has already become. But one final question remains: is there a way out? Or have we gone too far? History shows that great empires have collapsed when sins became greater than the civilization itself. Are we on the brink of collapse? Or is there still time to escape this dark cycle? The answer may be right in front of us, but do we have the courage to see it?